Okay, hi everybody. So let's take a look at our story of war over here. Let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit over here so that way it's a little bit easier to see. Um, what I want to do today is I want to go through our short story War really quick and kind of show you how I read it and kind of show you how to do a close reading of a text like this. Um, and then I'm going to introduce what we're going to work on this week. We're going to get into our first actual kind of longer work. We're going to do a graphic novel by Neil Gaiman called Punch and Judy. But first things first, war. Which by the way, I've got two monitors. So you guys are on the top of this monitor, but my story is actually over here. So if I'm looking this way, it's because that's what I'm looking at. Um, One of the things that we try to look at whenever we look at something like war is we try and look for things that repeat a lot, right? Um, things that, so ways to do an analysis of a text. Look for ideas that repeat a lot and come up a lot because those are probably important. Look at titles, look at names, and then look at traditional symbols, things that have long been established as symbols for like other things. And that's always a good place to start whenever trying to do a deeper analysis. I'm going to start with the name Angelo. The name Angelo means angel, right? So Angelo just means angel. Really, really easy here, right? And then as I read, I noticed that there's a lot to do with movement in the story. That there's a lot talked about how he's moving from up to down, right? So he starts on the heights in front of his house in the brightness, right? Because there's also a lot of talk about the brightness of the world around them, whether it is dark or it is light out, right? So he starts on the heights in the light, right? And then he talks about the darkness that he must go into at night. Now we all know that much like Star Wars, darkness is evil, right? You got the light, the dark side of the Force is like bad. Darkness has always been associated with like evil, in many ways because it's associated with the unknown. And if you think back to the Bible, for instance, the first sin ever committed was seeking knowledge, right? And the unknown has always been something that we've associated with evil. For the Puritans, it was the woods because the woods were unknown. They were evil. So darkness has long been associated with evil. So he's talking about how he starts up here on the heights, up high in the light, and he must go into the darkness tonight, right? And then he falls down the familiar path, sliding downwards, dropped to the road below, right? And actually, the word below here should also be highlighted, right? So this is four repetitions of the idea of downness in a single sentence, right? In one sentence. So this author is telling us that this idea of downwardness, of going down, is important. That this is something that we should be paying attention to. This is not by accident, right? No, so you got to remember whenever you're reading something written like this has gone through multiple revisions. This is something that they spent a lot of time on and they've edited and they've worked on it to like get it down perfectly just the way that they want it to be. So we have to assume that nothing in here is by accident. So if they include an idea four times in the same sentence, it's probably important. What I also want you to keep track of is this idea that his shape is changing, right? So he starts. Hold on, let me open up a paint here real quick. Give me 1 second. So he starts and he's standing. So we'll draw a little guy standing here, right? Ignore my terrible drawing skills. I'm drawing with the mouse, right? So he starts standing and then he moves to crouching. You see the crouching there? So the crouching is just kind of a little hunched over, right? Oh my God, look at his misshapen head, all right? So now he's crouching. And we're going to keep track of this as we go along too, because this also becomes important, right? So we know that he's going down and he's crouching, and then he starts off in the lights, right? And the full moon is shining, right? But then it starts to be covered. It's effaced a moment later by a drifting phalanx of clouds, right? And so a drifting phalanx of clouds, I'll draw this over here. So if this is the moon, the drifting phalanx of clouds means this, right? So now this is starting to happen to the moon. All right. So what that means is this is darkness encroaching, and this idea here of Viola's dark eyes in the moon, right? the pale moon appeared for a moment in the window. So what he's saying here too is Viola, his wife, is also a source of light. She is being associated with the full moon here, and so and so she is a source of light and therefore goodness, right? Because if darkness is evil, then light is good, right? So he goes and then he rolls into a ditch again, further going down, right? And then we will scroll down a little bit here, and then we get to this point where he's kind of running away. He's still in town, and he's trying to consider uh, where he has to go next, and he's worried about getting hurt in the darkness. He understands that the darkness is dangerous. He understands that it's not a place that he wants to be, but he kind of feels like he has to go in there. And then we get to this right here. Boom, Angelo plunges into the darkness, and this is really the beginning of Angelo's change, where he knows that this is not a good place to go. He's thought about it since the very beginning of the story here, but he's forced into it. So now he feels like he's being forced into the darkness, into this place of kind of evil and badness, right? Scroll down here. And then he's at the point now where he's being forced to go into this bamboo swamp, right? And a cold shudder runs through him at the thought of the poisonous snakes that live there. So we know that snakes are also a traditional symbol of evil, right? Again, going back to Genesis, the devil first appears in the form of a snake to tempt Eve. You go to Harry Potter and Slytherin and Voldemort, and it's all snakes. Snakes are well-established symbols of evil, and now he is venturing into the place where evil lives. So not only is he going into the darkness, he is going into the darkness where evil itself lives. And so as soon as he goes into the land of evil, to the place where like evil lives, he touches his knife. And this is the first hint that we have of Angelo being violent, right? Up until now, everything is about running and trying to hide and seek peace. And this, as he first ventures into the land of the snakes, he first touches his knife, right? Undisturbed, he's squatted. So now he goes from crouching to now we are squatting. Right here, we'll give him some little because he's squatting now as well. All right. He's squatted still as a cypress tree, right? And they met him in the light of the veiled moon. So our moon went from a phalanx of clouds to now being completely or almost completely covered. She's veiled, meaning covered moon, right? So now darkness is becoming more complete. So not only is he going into the realm of the darkness, but the world is becoming dark as well, right? And then we get this point here. This paragraph here is kind of interesting and important. It's this whole paragraph here. So up until now, this has really been about Angelo visiting his family in the evening time and kind of the implications of that, and then him trying to get away and him having to go into the swamp. And then we get this brief reprieve here where Taki meets Manoli and Dimitri at the crossroads, and he brings light into the darkness. Now this is important because you've got the idea of associated images. So what that means is when we combine multiple symbols to create an entirely new meaning. So we've got the symbol of the cross at the crossroads, right? So the crossroads and then the symbol of the cross, and we've got two people in darkness, and then somebody that brings light to people in darkness at a cross, right? And so all these things add up to create this new idea of almost like a Christ figure bringing light into the darkness, right? And so Taki is going to give his light to Dimitri and Manoli, right? And they're going to take it into the world of evil, into the swamp, into the darkness where the snakes live with them. All right. They're going deeper, right? And so he keeps on getting more and more submerged into the swamp and into the darkness. And then we get this. He realized that he might have to fight in the swamp, perhaps even die in the swamp. He pictured himself floating face down amidst the reeds, his lifeless eyes staring into the dark waters. Slippery parasites drawn by his warm blood streaming into the cold swamp would feed upon him, and he shuddered. Right? And so this is starting to sound a lot like hell, right? This dark place where things are going to feed on your body while it's ripped to pieces by parasites. Like, whole thing sounded not like a place to be, right? And then as soon as he gets into the swamp, he starts to think of Viola, right? And his thoughts switch to his wife and their relationship. And initially, it seems like they have this fierce love, right? Like she loves him passionately, and she is worried for him and his safety, and she doesn't want him to die because like she loves him, right? But it also starts to talk about how the war is straining their relationships because they have different ideas of how this whole thing should like play out. Then, as he goes deeper into the darkness, though, he realizes that his thoughts on her begin to change and his perception of their relationships begin to change. Here we get this phrase, it bowed his head and his shoulders, this like realization. So he's already squatted, but now he's got a bowed head and shoulders, right? So he's even more broke down here. Meh, meh, meh. Oh gosh, I know that's terrible. Sorry, right? And then it says the musky scent of the swamp clung to him, shame clung to him. So this realm of darkness is starting to stick to Angelo as he starts to think about his relationship with Viola and the realities of the war. The darkness that he's wading through starts to cling to him. All right. Then we get to this passage here. A different man from himself, he would have considered, would have resolved the problem swiftly. There would have been less talk to. He had seen wives like his, fierce but quieted, smoldering in a subdued obedience that did not affect their mothering, but transformed them into hardened women. Women whose words were blows married to men whose blows were words. This is probably the best written line of the whole story as well. And basically, what he says here is other men would just beat their wives until they stopped acting up in like public, and that would be how this whole situation would like be resolved. That's what men did. But he did not want him and Viola to become like this. He doesn't want to have to beat his wife like other men. And yet, and this and yet sentence here set off in its own paragraph, right? Just a two-word paragraph set off is really the turning point of the whole story. This is where the whole story kind of shifts and twist, and we start to see the change happens, right? And then water climbs over his like feet, and his feet are like freezing right now his feet are freezing is important because it means that he still has some warmth, but it's starting to be disrupted by the coldness of his environment. And overhead, the moon drew the clouds around herself, concealing him as best as she could. So now he's in total darkness, right? His boots became more and more difficult, blah, 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 blah. And now he talks about his heart is at war. So now we see the different levels of like war here, and what was right he no longer knew. So the further he goes into the darkness, the more his own sense of morality and rightness and wrongness and then ethics is eroded, right? And then we get this. This is the first time that Angelo himself is associated with a snake. What if he were taken and killed here like a snake in the swamp? Well, why is this important? Because we know snakes are associated with evil, and this is the first time that Angelo is being associated with evil. All right, so before Angelo again started at the heights in the light with the light of his wife, and everything was good, and it smelled of orange blossoms, and everything was nice. And now he's being associated with a snake in the darkness in the swamp. And now the water had reached mid thigh. So he's still going deeper and deeper and down and down and down, right? Because as the water rises, that means he's continuing to go down. And something in the water rubbed against Angelo. He shivered and clasped his hands to his chest as the undulating body of the snake pushed against his thigh. And in his revulsion, he felt as though he had opened himself up to his nature. So if we know that the snake is evil and he has opened himself up to the nature of the snake, he has become what? He's become evil. And then immediately afterwards, he discovers a leech and he peels it off. And rather than throw it back like he normally would have done, he squishes it. And this is there to show us that there is a change that has happened in Angelo, where normally he would have been benevolent and kind and just tossed the leech away. Now he squishes it violently between his fingers. And then the very next sentence, Viola had become a bitter wife. And so, in this moment that he absorbs the nature of the snake, in this moment that he absorbs this evil, his entire ideas about his wife changed. And what was a source of life, she had become a bitter wife, and their marriage was not what it had been before the war, right? And anger hunched his body. So he's already here, and now anger. Oh my God, where's my mouse? There it is. And now anger hunches his body. So now, oh my goodness, look at how crazy this guy looks now, right? Anger's hunched his body. Boom. So, turning his back towards the shroudless moon. So now this is also important. Oh, I should have highlighted this. So now the moon has come out again. It is light again. It is now shroudless, meaning that it no longer has a shroud. It is no longer covered. It is the bright full moon. And what does Angelo do to it? He turns his back to it. He turns his back to the light. He chooses darkness, and he pulls his knife. And this is where up until now Angelo's just been running. He's just been trying to get away safely, and now he's not going to run. He pulls his knife and he turns around, and now he is choosing to be violent. He's choosing to kill. Then, so these blue words, so I just want you to just read these words: stalked, coiled, cold, it strikes, it hisses, and it bites. So what stalks is coiled. You almost step on it. It hisses and bites and strikes. It's a snake. And all of these words are words that are now being associated with Angelo. Angelo stalks. He coils. Manoli nearly steps on him. Angelo strikes. He extinguished the flame with a sharp hiss. Angelo bit deeply into Manoli's heart. So at this time, whenever he murders Manoli, all the language is language and words that you would use to describe a snake, but it is used to describe Angelo and the things that Angelo does. And this again is that associated symbolism that is associating Angelo with the snake to show that he has become himself evil. He is now the snake. He is the thing that he feared before. And now, not only has he turned his back on the light, he is now extinguishing the light. He is the darkness that removes light from the world. He extinguishes it with a sharp hiss, right? And then he is described as lightless and no longer cold. So he's lightless because he has become evil, and he's no longer cold because snakes are cold-blooded, and so he's no longer cold in the coldness because he's no longer warm-hearted. He has lost all of his warmth. He's lost all of his light. He has now become completely evil. And then in the end of this, his thoughts towards Viola have also completely changed, and he's decided that he's going to be more like other men. He's going to handle his wife the way that other men would, meaning he's going to resort to just abusing her to get her to be the woman that he wants her to be. And then the very end, Angelo followed the light into the depth and darkness light, right? So he is going to extinguish Dimitri's light as well as he ventures further into the darkness. And also, you may recognize this. So what does this look like, right? Right, what does this image look like here? So if you pull up, give me 1 second here. You've also probably seen this in the past before. Oh, you've probably seen this in the past before, right? This is this human evolution image, right? Right? But it looks the opposite of what happens here. And it's because Angelo is losing his humanity. As he goes further into the darkness and further into the swamp, he loses his humanity and the things that make him human. Now, every time that I do this, I have students that are like, Price, you're reading way too much into this. You're
You're full of crap. This is you're just doing too much. You are doing it. You are doing the most. And I think that that's fair sometimes. But the reason why I use this story is that I happen to know the guy that wrote it. The guy that wrote it was actually a college professor of mine. His name is Dr. Michael Coronis. He teaches English literature at Trevecca Nazarene University, and he wrote this actually as an example of how to do close reading for his students. In fact, me doing this exact lesson kind of changed my entire life and how I read. It was very instructive for me, and he wrote this story simply to demonstrate the principle of intentionality and reading for author intent to his classes. And his idea was like really simple. He's just a simple college professor. He's not some expert writer. He's not some literary great. And he wrote this story in a single day. He didn't spend months and years working on it, tailoring it, making it perfect. He wrote it in a single day, and it communicates six different levels of like war: World War II, the Civil War, the marital war, psychological war, the natural war, and the spiritual war, or man versus man, man versus society, man versus woman and or spouse, man versus self, man versus nature, man versus God, right? And then he lists all of these significant images here, right? Everything that I talked about today, except for the dehumanization, is something that he specifically lists in the things that he wanted us to get out of this story. And so this is somebody, again, a story that he wrote in a single day. He's just a lowly college professor. And his whole point is that if he can do this in a short story that's 5 pages that he wrote in a day, what are these literary greats doing in novels that they spend 10 years working on? How much is there to unpack in those works? How much meaning is there below the surface that we are meant to discover if we will only take the time to do so? And so that is war. So I have included my annotated reading of this story in this week's material, so that way you can pull it down and you can take a look at it and be good to go. So let's talk about what you're doing next this week. Next, you're going to take a gander at your first text for this class. That is kind of a longer text, an actual novel. It is a novel written by Neil Gaiman, illustrated by Dave McCain. Neil Gaiman, very famous novelist. He's written a lot of unbelievably famous and important graphic novels, as well as several really important regular novels like American Gods, Stardust, Coraline, Neverwhere. He wrote the graphic novels Sandman, Punch and Judy, Wolf in the Walls, The Graveyard Books. All very, very, very relevant, very important author. We're going to read one of his other novels at some point later. But this is a graphic novel, kind of like a comic book, but then also kind of not, because it's not meant to serve as a comic book. And as you can see, just scrolling through it, it is very different from most of what you guys consider whenever you think about comic books. I've included a file here for this comic book, but you're probably going to have to download something to read it with. If you're on your phone, you just need to download any app that lets you read a CBZ. All right, a CBZ. So like you can just search up CBZ Reader, and it will give you an app that will let you read it. If you are on a computer, I've posted a link to Calibri, which is a excellent ebook reader. It works very, very well. And then you've got some guided some guiding questions to answer as you go along. We're going to talk more about this next week, but I just wanted to give you a couple of guiding questions so that way you just weren't completely in the dark with like, how do I read this, right? And let me make sure that I've uploaded those here real quick. Yeah. So those are uploaded as well. I've also linked you to Punch and Judy, the comic book, has a frame story that is built around a British theater production, which is really famous, that has been around for about 350 years, called the Punch and Judy Show. Basically, every kid in like England has seen the Punch and Judy Show at like some point. It is a well-established part of the British culture, but it's not a well-established part of ours. So I also gave you a link to a introductory video on the Punch and Judy show. So if you want some extra context for the work, feel free to check that out. And then you've got your weekly discussion post. So all that I'm going to ask you to do this week is read the Punch and Judy comic. Watch this video, obviously, and then fill out your Punch and Judy guided reading. And I will have an assignment where you can upload those, all right, and get those uploaded. As always, if you have any questions or if you need anything, feel free to hit me up on Schoology or my email. I'll be glad to get back to you. There's only 2 of you that are turning in any work right now, so I don't really know how to do any kind of discussion-based activities or any kind of group work because there's only 2 of you. The class is really small as it is. There's only like 5 people in the class in total, and only 2 of you have actually turned in any assignments so far. The other 3 have literally never done anything, so it's kind of made this class really weird. It's a really weird and bizarre class, to say the least. So for those 2 of you that have been doing stuff, excellent. For those of you that haven't, I hope it starts soon. I've been emailing you guys. I've been messaging you on Schoology. I'm doing what I can to try and get you guys involved. Please do something, all right? Anyways, if you need me, reach out to me. I'll be glad to help you out. Good, enjoy reading Punch and Judy. It's one of my favorite comics. There's a lot going on there. I hope that you enjoy it. If you have any questions with it, it can be a little difficult. Feel free again to email me. I'll be glad to help you out. All right.